This is Van Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Sean Carlton. And you're a podcaster yourself. You have two podcasts, CEO of the Dark Age Media and publisher of SAMO Lives. So we can talk more about your podcast as we introduce you to the audience. But welcome to the Van Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Doing real good, Phantom. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Want to let people know we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. We'll be on there later tonight. And so if you use that coupon code of GHOST, you can try that out. If you never tried out Newsly, you can use that GHOST coupon and check us out later tonight. This episode, an audio only version, will be there tonight. We also have SAMO Lives.substack.com, your URL. Mm-hmm. And that will be fully clickable when we're published, so you won't have to remember that, but that will stay here. And then we also want to talk about, your podcast and Dark Age Media. So again, welcome to the show. And we always preface when we talk to people, we have two questions we always start at the beginning. Like, what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Well, what motivates me is that I really want to kind of utilize the digital media landscape as it is right now. I also kind of want to change it too. I see there's a lot of room for growth, especially in podcasting. It's been around for a while, but I think it has a lot of room that can continually improve. And in my own adventures with podcasting, I have seen where it can go, and I've grown it even in my own right. So I think it has a huge growth potential to it. So, yeah. And the other question was, what keeps me going?
Yeah, well, it's like, why, what motivates you? Why do you do what you do? Like, what's your passion point, like, of why you do it?
My passion point is just for the people that I speak to. Like, whenever I get someone on either of my podcasts, a brand new person, I get to talk to someone new that has a different perspective, that has different ideas, has different backgrounds, different energies, and just all kinds of things that I can just take away from the conversation, even just speaking for an hour. And even just speaking for an hour at one time, I haven't had a follow-up interview yet in my podcasting career, but I've debated it because there's some people out there I really want to catch up with that I haven't spoken to since, maybe 2 years ago when I started this. So it's the adventure really of just kind of meeting and talking to new people. That's what keeps me going.
That's interesting. Like, so follow-ups, what you'd ever wanted to have the follow-ups, you always wanted to have like new people, like new blood coming in. Was that like a conscious decision, or you just ended up doing it that way?
I just kind of ended up doing it that way. I guess for a lot of people, I guess we kind of we covered everything at that point that was to cover, and a lot of people, we left off. They had more projects in the works here, and I just hadn't gotten back to them about where they're at with things. So really, it just kind of was that way, because I hadn't had a chance to kind of reach back to anyone and say, hey, how are things going? We spoke about this when we last spoke. Where's it at now? That kind of thing. A lot of these people are very busy too. And so, just getting them once was kind of a blessing.
Hard, yeah.
was a blessing. So just kind of pinning them down one time. So going for a second helping there seemed like sometimes asking for more than you can get.
That's interesting, because when I started, I was dealing primarily with emerging and independent singer-songwriters. And because they had albums and tours, a lot of times I got them to come back for their next album or their next tour because they needed the promotion. And so it was kind of like that was like the synergy of what was going on. And the same thing with some authors that have like another book. And so they want to promote the book. But it's just different methods of what you feel comfortable with. Like if your mindset or how you present your shows, everybody does their show the different way. And within the podcasting world, it has. I started on a cell phone with like whatever an iPhone was like 5 years ago.
Uh-huh.
That's what I did, and I didn't do. Had you always been like in one format or the other? Are you primarily audio or video?
I was always audio and video. My setup currently today is more or less what it was just 2 years ago. I mean, I utilize a microphone more than I did, but even that's kind of gone back and forth. I just kind of went back into it, a couple months ago using a microphone. I thought my laptop microphone was okay, but then I kind of decided this sounds a little bit better. It doesn't sound bad without it, but it just sounds a little bit better. And I have an additional light here, a little cubicle light that gives me additional lighting, and it's grown and gotten a bit more sophisticated in the 2 years, but it's more or less the same as it was when I first started out with. I mean, it's just me and my laptop. And well, actually, when I started out podcasting, the first couple, about half dozen episodes are just me speaking. So, and then
Mhm.
I don't know, I kind of got bored just me talking. I thought that sounded kind of boring. So I figured, hey, I might as well branch out here and see if I can actually get people on to
Get
talk
gas.
to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, right. And so that's where Podmatch came into. And
Mhm.
I've met all kinds of very interesting people. And Podmatch is really cool because I can't see how I would have met even half of these people without it. Um, and it's
That's
been,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So they're mostly virtual meetups here, although the first person I did interview was an in-person interview here.
Oh, you did.
Yeah, yeah. So I booked some space at the local library here, and she was local to where I live, and this was for Fitness Reborn. And she ran this really cool organization called it's like the it was called HEMA. That was the acronym. It was like Historical European Martial Arts Society, something like that.
Wow.
And yeah, it's basically where they do jousting. They do mock
Oh,
jousting and they do real jousting. You could, if you got signed up for it, you could do like the mock jousting, which is just like you're playing around. You're not actually hurting each other or doing anything like that, um, or fighting. And or if you really want to get into it, you could go the extra mile and actually do the real fights. She was part of the real fighting end of things. And yeah, so that was the first person I spoke to, and she was really cool. We really hit it off, and it was a great interview, and it just encouraged me to want to do more.
that's interesting. Like my first interview experience back in the 2016 was on an app called Spearman. That was an
Mm,
iPhone app that allowed you to podcast, but it was recorded and it was recorded live with another person. So it kind of, you couldn't really do it by yourself. You had to find somebody else. And
hmm
what I was doing is I initially was approached by a guy that was pitching Spearman, and he was like a radio guy, and he had seen my catalog on SoundCloud, and he said, "I want to interview you and on a podcast." And I said, What is a podcast?" So 5 years ago, I didn't even know what it was. What is that? Like a radio interview? And so I did
Pretty
it,
much.
and we liked each other so much, we decided to do a co-hosted show about music for like
Oh,
6
nice.
months. And
Oh,
it just came
cool.
out of that. And then from there, he decided he couldn't do it anymore. His name was Rock Tunes was his stage name, and my fan was mine. And so it was like Rock Tunes and Phantom. When we talked about music, we talked about bands, Beatles, everything. And and then eventually I started I had been posted on Instagram these interviews that we would post it wherever they were published. And then other musicians said, "Oh, could I get interviewed?" And so
Mm,
I just started getting these. People would say they want to get interviewed, and I had a pitch,
mm,
and I would just send them on a DM a pitch, and that's I
yeah.
would get 4 bands a month just doing that.
Nice. So I'm just really curious, like, how did you decide upon the moniker Phantom Electric Ghost?
Well, that's my band. Like if you see,
Oh, okay.
this is my studio.
Oh,
I'm in my
okay.
home studio. I'm a synthesist. I got my Moogs and my Rolands and my multi-tracks and all kinds of analog gear. But
Okay.
I called myself Phantom Electric Ghost as my band name. It's my my stage name, and
Right.
I decided to make the name of my podcast to reflect the same name as my band. My band is called Phantom Electric Ghost, and then podcast is Phantom Electric Ghost, and so we just I have kind of a couple of hats, and
Right.
it just like became this thing. Well, it gave me like a stage name, and then I didn't have to use my real name, and I kind of like that capability of like being in a band. I had a stage name. I said, well, I'll just continue that with my podcast.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's just it also kind of leaves like if you get known for your real name, sometimes you get hassled, and and
No.
having some separation for me was
Hmm.
good because my day job, I'm a software guy, and I'm in the software business as my day job, and it keeps that kind of out of it. I have a separate LinkedIn for Phantom versus my LinkedIn for my software design, so I kind of
Right.
keep both worlds separate.
Gotcha. I was just curious. It's really cool.
It's a different way. Because I grew up liking guys that, Prince and Bowie, they created these personas.
Hmm.
Freddie Mercury, they're the personas. They would come out with these different versions of themselves. And I was very interested in the theater and stagecraft of that. So I just said, well, I'll do the same idea. And it's kind of based in like science fiction, like they
Hmm.
sing the body electric, the idea
Right.
that ghosts have a synthesis and ghosts have or like music has frequencies and electricity and frequencies are in everybody. And it's like
Hmm.
the ghost in the machine. Like if you're
Right.
thinking about like an analog synth, like a Moog, it's kind of magical synthesizers. Like what is that? It's like a ghost. Like sometimes they create their own frequencies out of nowhere, at least with analog equipment, and they kind
Hmm.
of feel like they're living. And so I kind of
Yeah.
took advantage of that idea that these analog synths are living things, and I'm
Gotcha.
kind
Gotcha.
of ghost manipulating it. But
That,
that's enough
that's
of that.
that's really cool. It's really cool. It's a great story. So I was just very curious. I guess that's just the host and me coming out. I was just very curious where that came from.
No, it's cool. Yeah, not that many people ever ask me. Like I've had over 1,000 interviews. There's like 1,088, I
Wow.
think. Well, 87, and
87. Yeah.
it's maybe 5 people have asked me like where to come from. So,
Well,
so
I'm
it's
glad
been fun.
I'm glad I'm one of the special five then.
But like podcasting, like you kind of found a way to get into it.
Hmm.
What made you want to keep doing it? Because there's a metric out there that says podcasters tend to fail after like 6 to 12 episodes and to stop.
Yeah. I don't really know what really kept me in the game. I heard that too. And actually, on the 1 year anniversary, yeah, 1 year anniversary of my podcast, my Fitness Reborn podcast. So it'd be May of 23. I made a special video saying more or less just that. It's like, we've made it 1 year into this. 99% of podcasts are dead by this point. And so, the fact that we've gotten this far is pretty dang special here. So really, I don't know what really kept me going. I guess it was just because I guess things, if I'm thinking back far enough, things kind of picked up pretty quickly, or at least enough that the momentum was good, that I
Mhm.
found enough reasons to keep going. Especially when I got onto Podmatch, and I really got into like, hey, would you like an interview? Would you like an interview? Would you like to come on? That kind of stuff. And I uh, got more and more people to come on, and the more episodes I got tucked away, the amount of people who started requesting
Interviews.
me interviews
Yeah.
with me began to pick up. So it was just momentum on top of momentum. And before you know, I got a full calendar. I typically booked out maybe about 3 months in advance on Fitness Reborn. And it just keeps feeding on itself here. And I think after a while, too, it was like I had a lot of interviews stacked up. They kept me going. And also, too, the more people I had on, the more people I had scheduled, the more it began to feel like a responsibility
Yeah.
to
Yeah. I think
show up.
show up. Yeah. To keep
That
on
was
showing up.
right, and that was the other thing too, because I am asking people and hosting people who are PhDs and business owners and very super smart professional people who probably just don't like having their time wasted.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, they're very busy. And so if they can find a pocket of time, and I only interview 2 days a week on Sundays and Mondays, and the fact that they reserve some time out of their schedules to speak with me is probably a big deal. And I didn't want to just not show appreciation for that kind of thing. So I guess it was the momentum, the excitement, the thrill of podcasting, and also the feeling of responsibility to the people that I have scheduled. So, if they didn't show up, which does happen, I've had
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
I've
No
had,
show. No
yeah,
show.
I've had people no show me quite a bit, and these are again professional people. Some of them, very educated, very successful people who decide, I guess, who just don't show up. And so, if they do that, they do that. That's on them, but it's not on me.
Yeah.
So it's both those things. I really.
Well, I found a way to minimize that. I started coming up with processes. One of my processes is you making sure that I get the calendar invite for them, like
Hmm.
making sure that I actually remind them. Like what I noticed, like there's certain
Right.
types of people that if you don't remind them, even if they have a calendar, they don't show up. So if I started, even if I have a calendar invite, if I go and I send like a reminder a day before or maybe
Mm,
2 days before, then that my no shows like dropped off significantly because I did a little bit of little interaction of
right.
of doing that, and over time, the I think just the feedback loop is great for podcasting. What I like is like you get guests that refer you to other guests, and then they
Hmm.
refer you to other guests, and then you get this momentum.
Right.
And it was with musicians, it was happening a lot. Like when I was dealing with musicians, I'd interview a band in a scene, and then that whole scene would want to get interviewed. So if there's multiple bands in that collective, then I end up interviewing them
Right.
all. So if one band had a good experience, they tell their
Right.
other band friends, and musicians tend to know other musicians,
Sure.
and they would recommend other people. And just like the same thing with authors, they know
Right.
other authors, and then you just get this continual feedback loop, and it becomes like you say, a responsibility. Like if I'm showing up and I'm consistent, then it becomes not that it's a job, it's like a passion thing. It's like I got 3 jobs. I got 3 things I do. I'm a producer, I'm a podcaster, I'm a musician. Well, another one, I'm a software guy. So this isn't the only thing I do, but I just find it very fun. And if I wasn't having fun doing it, I probably wouldn't do it. Like if it becomes something that's
Right.
like not interesting to me, then it won't continue.
Right. And it definitely is fun. And it's definitely something that's taken me out of my comfort zone for the last 2 years because, I'm not a naturally outgoing, gregarious guy. I will be perfectly fine being at home, being by myself.
Mhm.
So it's just, it's a lot of fun, and it's really kind of, I think it's kind of given me a lot of personal growth in the last 2 years. And, you're right. If it wasn't any fun, if I just thought it was a constant slog, which I'll be perfectly honest. I mean, sometimes on certain days it does feel like way. It's like, man, I'm not in the mood to meet anybody. I don't want to talk to anybody right now. I didn't sleep very well.
Mhm.
I'm in a bad mood. I had a bad day yesterday, and I just don't want to meet anybody. So sometimes I do have to drag myself into it. But the thing is too, is like once it gets going, it gets better.
Yeah.
The bad mood dissipates, and you just kind of you slide into this alter ego that you have to be when you're on camera. And so like you were saying about your stage name, it's a lot like doing that. It's like, cameras are on, lights are on, it's go time, and you just kind of hit a switch, and you become essentially someone else. And I've had to do that before too in my professional life. I'm a fitness trainer too. I've
Yeah,
led
so
group.
on stage.
Yeah, I'm a fitness trainer. I've done one-on-ones. I've done group classes. I used to teach kickboxing classes. And so when you're standing up in front of a room full of 30 to 40 people, you have
You have to
to
have
be
other
right.
face,
Yeah, right, exactly. You've got to become a different person, at least in my case. Some people are very natural just going up in front of others and leading people. That's not me. So I had to really create a different kind of persona that would work in that environment. So I've had to be adaptable in multiple environments.
Well, I find it's kind of like, if you're an athlete, right, and you're practicing that 3-point shot, you do
Mhm,
1,000 reps. It's like a musician that plays their bass guitar and they've done like 10,000
right.
hours of playing, so it's muscle memory.
Mhm.
And the
Right,
same
for
thing I
sure.
feel with like podcasting. Like when I first started, I was a mess. Like the first 10 episodes, I probably wouldn't want to listen to.
Right.
1,000 episodes later, it's that
Exactly.
1,000 episodes of muscle memory
Mhm.
of actually talking to 1,000 people. What I looked at it is like that is like a master class
Mm,
in the human condition, because I'm talking to
right.
1,000 other people that have all these ideas I never heard before.
Mhm.
And to me, it's like the oral tradition when you go take a class and you're listening to your professor. Well, you learn a lot from that human interaction, and
Right.
the podcast gives us that kind of masterclass situation with somebody that is like in their field. They're going to talk about what they're into, and you learn a lot. And even if you're not getting views or metrics or likes, or you're the biggest podcast in the world,
Mhm.
you are learning as a human being the skill of how to talk to another human being. And
Right.
over time, you get skills that you just become like part of you. And I think it permeates through the rest of my life. How I can talk to people, it's helped me in my business work because I feel
Yeah,
more comfortable at that percent.
yeah, I mean, for sure, and it's putting yourself on death ground, which is where a lot of your improvements and your growth will come from. Is it's the sink or swim situation, right? So your back is against the wall. What are you going to do? Well, you can't do nothing, so you have to do something here, and it is, you're right, it's the master class of self-improvement. It's putting yourself in position of something that is difficult, something that's outside of your normal nature. This is why I've said before, i've I've commented on the past, you know how you hear people who tell you, just be yourself, just be
Yeah,
yourself, just don't worry about it, just be yourself. Well, again, if I was myself, I wouldn't be doing any of this. I wouldn't be talking to you right now if that was myself, right? Because that's just like, I'm sitting here talking to a perfect stranger. I don't really know this person. I don't know what kind of personality they have. I don't know what they're going to throw at me. There's no pre-questions ever that have been sent to me or anything like that. I know in general what we're going to talk about, but who knows what's going to be coming at me. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. But if I was just myself, I wouldn't be doing really a lot of things I would be doing. I wouldn't be leading fitness classes. I wouldn't be podcasting. I wouldn't be starting a publishing company. I wouldn't be in the digital media space. So I so I've said before that this idea of just being yourself sounds like great advice, but it's really not great advice. You
no,
know,
you might
it
stay in a loop. I mean,
right.
if you're yourself, you might stay in a loop and just stay on the couch,
Mhm,
or stay in the zone that you're most comfortable and never
right.
challenge yourself. There's I always bring up this comment to musicians, but David Bowie brought up this thing, right? And they asked him, "How come you're always like shape shifting? How come you're always changing your genres?" And he said, "I don't feel comfortable as an artist unless I'm treading water."
Mm,
That he would go like, if you think about it, like he's Ziggy Stardust, he's a rock and roll, right? Then the next thing
right,
he's working with Luther Vandross, and
right.
Luther Vandross can sing better than he can. And instead of being intimidated, he took
Right.
it as a learning experience, and he played with Stevie Ray Vaughan, who plays better guitar than he can, right?
Uh-huh.
So he would go and put himself in situations where he wasn't the best
Right,
to push himself into genres that he wasn't really great at.
right.
But
Exactly.
then he became this kind of enigma that he could cross through things because he was willing to maybe fail, maybe not do as well, maybe lose some of his audience because he didn't stay Ziggy, he didn't stay Thin White Duke, he didn't stay in the characters. He would, yeah, I did that. I could stay there, but that's boring to stay
Yeah.
there. So
Yeah.
you would shapeshift and change. And when you're willing to push the envelope and willing to, take the hit that you don't
Mhm.
really know what you're doing, but you're going to
Mhm.
try it and
Mhm.
see what happens.
Right, right. And it's so easy to fall into mediocrity because it asks nothing of you. It requires nothing of you. And I think that's a loop that a lot of people do get caught up into, and just the line that you should just be yourself just sort of reinforces it. I don't think it's malicious advice. I don't think it's given to anybody as something that's
No.
supposed to sabotage them. I think it's given with all the best intentions in the world. But I think if you really want something more for yourself, then you have to accept that maybe who you are in your entirety is just not enough. And you got to kind of build, not change who you are necessarily, but
Mhm.
build upon who you are. Take what you are as the foundations and then build up from there. That's all I come back with. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know where you stand on that.
Well, I think a lot of times that we have this inner child that's kind of pushed down. So
Mhm,
when we're a kid, we immediately jump into things. You jump on that bike and you keep on falling down. You keep
mhm.
on doing it. You don't get. If I know adults is like, I can't ride a bike, and they won't even try. I can't
Right.
roller skate. They won't even try. Right? They can't swim. I won't even try. But the kid, they'll go jump in the lake. They'll go do. When
Right.
you have that inner child kind of thing, like I don't know what I can't do, and I'm gonna try it. I think we've kind of teach ourselves out of that. It was like you got to grow up. But what I
Mhm.
found with a lot of creative people, they still have that kind of childlike
Mhm.
curiosity,
Yeah.
and they don't listen to the haters and say, "Well, you shouldn't do that. Or you can't do that. You could never imagine doing it." That they said, "Well, why not? Why
Yeah.
can't I do that?" And so it's still whatever their dream is, they don't think it's impossible. They think it's
Right.
possible to actually evolve and to have like a growth mindset where, yeah, I'm going to go and try to expand rather than
Mhm.
to contract and stay in a narrow lane, you know?
Exactly right. And if you do ask them, why can't I do that? Why shouldn't I do that? Why is that so impossible? The answers you get back are usually not very good or not very convincing, or they just kind of struggle to give you an answer at all, and they just kind of hope that they can just that line that, well, you can't do that, that's not for you. It'll just hang there because most people won't challenge it. um they'll just kind of, because I don't know, a lot of people have it kind of built into them or beaten into them that, yeah, you're right, maybe it is too good for me, and so they
Well, yeah,
just
we
buy
have a
it.
lot. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of that imposter syndrome because,
Yeah.
you were told as a kid, you're never going to amount to nothing. You're not, you're ugly. You're this and that. So those child things, the things that happen in childhood, they stick with you. I've talked to tons of people, therapists over time, that
Hmm.
people are stuck in these glass ceilings or
Hmm.
boxes that were created in their childhood or created in their youth. And they don't, oh, what happened? We lost you. Well, we were having a good conversation and it just dropped out. So hopefully he'll jump back in. Maybe he just had an internet outage that we kind of worry about, but something happened. So we're just waiting for him to come back. Sean Colton, we were just talking to him. We just had like a technical difficulty. Hopefully he can get back on. So we were having a good conversation with Sean Colton, creator of two podcasts and CEO of Dark Age Media. I don't know if they had some kind of power outage where he is. We were having a great conversation. We'll give him another couple of, oh, here he goes.
Sorry.
So I was
Yeah, sorry
explaining we
about.
just had a technical difficulty, but we're back.
Yeah, we're back. Sorry about that.
That's all right. But we were just talking, I think, just about limiting beliefs and people self sabotage that kind of thing. We can go from there.
Right. Yeah, and the other thing is too is like I most people, they get told things that about themselves that aren't necessarily true. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of them do get it from the people who are closest to them, like their friends or their friends and family or their siblings and stuff like that. But a lot of times it's coming from people who, you know, whose opinion you really shouldn't put very you shouldn't value very much anyway, because they're strangers. They're nothing to you. They're not friends,
Yeah.
they're not family, they're just people, especially now. This is all the more worse now these days in social media,
Social
where
media, all the haters.
all the
Like the people,
haters,
yeah, you put your post out and then somebody goes like, "I hated it." So they
mhm,
take the time to
right?
tell you they hated it. Well, you could have just
Well, you
passed it
watched
by,
it. Yeah.
but you find it important to let people know how much you hate things. Right? So,
Mhm.
okay, that's very fine. Being a creative person, that's fine. Like if you don't dig the vibe that we're giving off as artists, fine, move to the next artist. But this constantly, we get some people who will just continuously, but you hate it. Why are you always here? Why are
Yeah,
you always here if you hate
right.
it?
Right. And yeah, no good answers to questions like that for sure.
Yeah, like that. Like, so that's why you have to like not let that hurt you. Because I know there are
Mhm,
some artists that they're so people pleasing that if they get the bad reviews, they get the Billboard bad review, they get the Pitchfork bad review, and then it kills them because
mhm,
they take the thing about being an artist is your vulnerability. If you're tapping into it's you. So that piece of work is a lot of you.
yeah,
So sometimes artists will take it very personal if they get like hit with a bad result. But a lot of times, to me, it's a learning experience because when you put something out there, it's like the law of attraction. Some
yeah,
people are going to get it, some people don't get it. A lot of great artists, the first time they put something out, like a Hendrix, his recording engineers thought the feedback was terrible. They tried to edit it out. They said, "What are you doing? You're too loud. You do this. You do that." So he kept on pushing and said, "This is what I hear in my head, and this is what's going to be there." And so you sometimes your immediate reaction from people around you, you have to kind of, if you believe in what you're doing, then you go with what you feel is what you're trying to express.
exactly. And there's very few rules to really anything in life, especially when it comes to arts and creativity. Um, there's certain rules you should follow in life for sure. But when it comes to expression, I think you are and should be bound by absolutely nothing. So if you put something out there, and the other part of it too is that a lot of this has to do with looking for outside validation. And if you
Mhm.
are someone who is you're someone who is constantly searching for that outside validation, and if you don't get it, then it's going to affect you a lot. So if you're going to do something, you have to do something for your own reasons too. It's wonderful when people are really receptive to the things you do. If I, have a podcast, I think it's a boomer of a podcast. I put it out there and it gets a lot of heavy traffic. A lot of people respond to it. I get a lot of good responses to it. That's great. It's an intoxicating feeling, but I know that's not going to be every podcast I make. And I'm quite sure that, I think just about everyone I've talked to, with the exception of one person in particular, has been absolutely great. Um, but I'm pretty sure that there's been a few out there who probably walked away from that interview with me and said, man, this guy sucks. Well, I did what I could
Yeah.
do. I did
Yeah.
what I could do,
You do it.
and right? And I'm sorry that you didn't think it was very good. But I did what I could do. I put it out there, and it is what it is. Like you told me before we started recording here, you don't do any edits. I do very little editing, other than just kind of like, you know, intro videos and conclusion
Mhm.
videos, exit videos, that kind of stuff. But I don't really mess with anything anybody said or any kind of pauses or anything stuff like that. I kind of just let it be for the most
Yeah.
part, unless there's like a glaring problem. Um, but yeah, I mean, you really have to resign yourself to the fact that if you're gonna do something, do it one to the best of your capabilities, and do it for your own reasons. And once it's out there, It's open for interpretation. People can take it or leave it, and people hate on it. Well, then they hate on it. That's all. That's not. There's nothing you can do about that.
Well, I think sometimes it's like you think about, being like in the flow state or in the,
Mm,
being in the present and, being present rather than there's a lot of, in our industry, like in music, there's this whole thing about the perfection trap. Like because of
yeah.
digital controls, I can
Right.
go in and I can make everything perfect.
Hmm.
But I'm a big fan of old music. So if I go back to stuff from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s before all the heavy tech we have today, there's a lot of mistakes on vinyl. There's a lot of mistakes on the tapes, on stuff even from the 80s. The
Hmm.
stuff that's actually imperfections or what we call happy accidents are part of the nature of art. But when you get to this point where you want everything to be perfect pitch, no timing errors, well, in music, the timing differences are kind of part of the flow,
Yeah.
right? Part, even the pitch differences are sometimes very authentic or vulnerabilities. Like you think about a guy like Neil Young, his pitch sometimes can be very vulnerable to the point where it's like cracking or not totally perfect. Like he can actually do a perfect performance when he sings with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. He does,
Hmm.
but sometimes he chose to be more kind of punk or less tied down, less like trying to be a perfect performance. And it was kind of like the birth of punk music. A lot of people go back and look at early Neil Young and like he was willing to put on record stuff that some people said, well, that's not actually presentable. And he's like, well, this is what I feel. This is what I think the song, this moment is what captures what I think the song is. So I'm
Hmm.
not going to change it. I'm just going to let it be what it is.
Exactly. And people are the same way about like movies too. Like some people won't watch old movies because the production value isn't quite as good as what we have available in terms of like, especially if like we're talking about special effects.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
from
Old special
yeah,
effects.
old special effects, but it has its own charm here too. And
Yeah.
you can have an appreciation for no, it doesn't look as good as the stuff that comes out now. That's all computer digitally created effects. But it has, for its time, you can appreciate the fact that for its time, it was state of the art stuff, and
Yeah.
it was considered
State of art. It was
great.
like the best at Star
Right.
Wars. The first Star
Right.
Wars compared to like what we had seen before was Star Trek
Mhm.
2001 Space 1999. Then we see Star Wars and it was like a leap forward. And it
Yeah.
like compared to the CGI and all the stuff you can do now. Yeah,
Well, yeah.
yeah, they even went back and re-edited, but I grew up watching that movie when it came out as a kid.
Mhm.
I'm a child of the 70s. I'm 56 years old. And I saw that movie like 5 times because I'd never seen anything like that. I
Yeah.
saw 2001, but then to me, and I still capture that moment of how it was. And I actually like to watch the unaltered version because it's a moment I saw in the theater as a
Right.
kid, and I think it's perfect the way it was. You
Right.
know,
And by that same token, sometimes the things can look so good and so perfect. If we're talking again about movie effects, things can look so good and so perfect that it actually backfires
yeah,
because it's so advanced that it's realistic, but it comes across as just not being realistic.
it's too good.
And I'll give you an example in my own case. Like I'm a child of the 90s, all right? I'm 41 years old. the the movie that got me into movies in terms of like big budget productions was Jurassic Park. All
Mhm.
right. So now that movie I loved it. It was to me what Star Wars was to you. I saw it 5, 6 times in the theater. It blew my mind. It was absolutely captivating to me as a 10-year-old kid seeing this stuff, these lifelike dinosaurs. I'd never seen anything like that. No one's seen anything like that.
Mhm.
That was the cream of the
Dinosaur,
crop.
dinosaurs, yeah,
Yeah,
dinosaur.
that was the cream of the crop of movie special effects when it came out. Now we all know they've made so many sequels to Jurassic Park. Now the sequels are still coming out too. Now everything is absolutely CGI. The dinosaurs, they're slick looking, but they're not scary looking.
Yeah,
And the thing about Jurassic Park, the original one, is like, yeah, you had the computer generated images in there too, but you also had robotics,
yeah,
puppetry.
Yeah, like
that kind of stuff. Right.
Muppet type puppetry. Yeah, yeah,
Right, exactly. So you had these creatures there that looked like flesh and blood three-dimensional creatures because not everything was done through computers. The models had to be built, robots had to be engineered. You know, you had to get teams of people here to run these things, to make them move. You know, they had to interact with human actors and stuff like that. It was a long, long process to get this stuff going. They had the CGI, but they used it to fill in the gaps
yeah.
of where, you know, the robotics and the
Puppetry,
animatronic, the puppetries
yeah.
couldn't quite get. So they used it as a supplement. But now it's the whole thing.
Yeah,
And
there's a problem. Like I totally agree because it goes to this thing about being too perfect. And there's
right.
something about the artistry and in music we run into the same thing. I can sample and I can use AI and I can loop and I can do all this stuff and not really even know how to play a guitar or a piano and just know
Mhm.
how to be a producer. And
Right.
that's not a bad skill set. Producers know grooves, they know what works together. But there's a difference from being a producer and actually being a musician. They can play the bass guitar through the whole 5 minutes of the song.
Right.
And something about actually really playing that bass for real rather than looping it and sampling it and having maybe micro timing errors or what you say are errors, but they're really the feel.
Mhm.
So if you have a player that plays the length of the song rather than somebody just grabbing bits and throwing them on a board, that's real playing. That's using an analog instrument, not a sampled instrument, not a, you know, like some kind of like digital recreation. It's a real analog instrument, like playing
Mhm.
real drums versus a
Right.
drum machine. A drummer that plays original beats that they constructed versus the drum machine, you'll always hear certain differences that the machine can never do. There's certain things about human drumming that a machine will never replicate. And
Right.
and if when you just think the machine can just replace the human, and in the tech we can replace the artistry of the puppeteer, this is where people start to make the mistakes. It's like there's something about things that are imperfect that are beautiful,
Right.
and,
Exactly.
and maybe they're missing the point.
Right. And I'm not dogging on electronic music. I like a lot of electronic music. I like the fact what a lot of these people can do with their stuff, to how they layer things, how they actually engineer and tweak things, and they create this wall of sound that is, you know, oftentimes very interesting to me. But you're right. I can definitely tell the difference between something that has been manufactured versus something that has been actually a product of, you know, human ingenuity, you know, an actual person who is playing a guitar or playing a bass or playing whatever, and maybe doesn't hit every single note just perfectly. You know, it's funny because I was actually at a band with a friend of mine several weeks ago, and they're a live band, and their bass player, at some point something happened to his bass. It gave
Oh,
off some weird noise. It gave off some weird noise while he was playing, and it was an accident. Like, it wasn't meant to happen. And everyone was kind of going frantic, saying, "Where's that coming from? Why is that happening? What's going on here?" La la la. And I thought it was part of the show. I thought he meant to do that. I thought it was just an effect he was doing with his bass, and I liked it.
you
You
liked it,
know?
yeah,
Yeah, it gave off a weird
yeah.
sound. It
It's
gave
a
off a
happy
weird.
accident.
Right,
That's what
right,
we call a happy accident.
right, exactly. It gave off a weird sound that maybe was a little bit anachronistic to everything else that was going on, what everyone else was playing in the band. But I liked it. I thought it was cool. I thought he actually meant to do that. But everyone else is looking at him like, what's going on over there? What's happening? You know?
That's interesting because there's famous, a couple famous things like the Kinks, like "You Really Got Me," that
Mhm.
song. The amp was broken, and the engineers wanted to fix it, but then Ray Davies said no, and his brother Dave Davies said no. There's something about the fact that that amp is broken that makes this song sound so different
Oh,
that we're gonna put it out with the broken amp sound. And the engineers and the producers like, no, 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 that's terrible. It's terrible. But it actually became an iconic type of sound. And then other people wanted to replicate it. And they had to actually create equipment
Really?
replicator. Yeah,
So
because it was an accident. There was the amp was broken,
so that
and
that 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 kind of nasient dun, 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 dun,
yeah,
dun, dun, dun,
yeah,
that's a broken amp?
yeah, the amp was broken.
Oh, very cool. I did
So
not know
that
that. See?
there's a lot of stories like that in music where stuff was like, it wasn't the mic wasn't right, the actual board was a little off, the timing's
Uh-huh.
off, the pitch is off, and it actually makes the song.
Yeah.
And then today, what people are losing is some of that kind of like, happy accident or be living in a moment or accepting what you actually hear and trusting it.
Mhm.
Where people are like, oh, no, no, I've got to go on the oscilloscope and make it perfect. It's like, what did you hear? Did
Right.
you hear something that was interesting, or do you just go with the really abstract, the just technical? I got to get it to match on the oscilloscope what I think it should be. That
Right.
versus actually listening to what you actually did. And this is with people too. Like, did you actually listen to are you actually reading the room? Like if you
Mm.
go to give a speech and you're like somebody who goes and gives speeches and you have a set written speech on your teleprompter, but you're reading the room and nobody's really getting it. So then you
Right.
need to kind of address like moment in time, like what you're saying is not carrying over. You need to adjust.
Right.
And
Right.
if you just think you're going to stay on your script, well, you're probably going to bomb then. Is like if you're
Right.
willing to adjust to the moment.
Yeah, that's something else. Like fitness training has taught me to improvise when I need to as well. Because when I was leading these classes, I would come up with all these elaborate things that people would do. I try to make it as fun as possible. Like try to make all these really coach these people into doing these really cool maneuvers and things like that, and kind of get them into this headspace. Like maybe like they're actually in a kickboxing fight here. Like this bag is an opponent. Keep moving. Keep doing this. So it becomes more lifelike. But there were times
Mhm.
when what I was trying to communicate just was not going over very well. People weren't getting it. They were messing up. They were giving me these confused looks. And so I had to pivot and say, instead of going through all these elaborate, maneuvers, let's just go back to something basic just to keep people in this flow state, keep things going, and
So
so,
engage. Yeah.
yeah, right. People get their workout in. They're not getting pissed off at me because I'm confusing them. And they can walk away saying, oh, that was good. No, it wasn't everything that I had planned. But, you make a plan and then you keep the options open. And that's the
Yeah.
same.
It's not that you don't plan,
Right,
but you're
right,
willing to deviate from your plan if the moment necessitates that you can.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's the same thing with podcasting. I can't tell you how many times I've hosted somebody and I've had to read the guest I'm talking to. Like, and some people, a lot of people they ease up a little bit. A lot of people go into it like they're kind of cagey. They're kind of
Mhm.
very, very probably nervous. They don't podcast very much. They're new to it. And so it takes them a little bit to kind of warm up to it. And once the ball gets rolling, then things really get rolling. But sometimes, I generally talk for about 45 minutes to an hour, but sometimes though, there's just not really,
Enough there.
there's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
really
you
enough
can
there.
yeah,
You got,
if you feel it not kicking, like, you can feel that you
right,
get these silences.
right.
Typically, when I get people, I try to get them, listening skills is like, I listen to what they're saying, and I let them make their point. And
Hmm.
if they have all these questions they like to be asked, but if I dive into something that deviates from all those things, then I let it go that way. And
Hmm.
so I kinda treat it like a fusion jazz session. Like,
Right,
if the bass player deviates from the main composition, it's not that we don't know it, but we're gonna deal with the fact that he decided to take it somewhere else.
right.
And if you can trust that, like, if you can live like jazz,
Hmm.
then things will go a lot easier than if you get flustered because it's not going. What I've run into is some people wanna go on a script, and I'm very jazz-like, and then
Yeah,
I realized that they wanted then I have to shift my jazz strategy to, "Oh, they want me to go question by question that they had prepared,
yeah,
and that's
yeah.
what they want." So I said, "Okay, I'll give them what they want." Because I can see they're getting frustrated, so, okay, I'll go give them what they want. They don't wanna do free flow. But
Right. Yeah, exactly too. And that's why like I don't put any restrictions or any kind of expectations on people when they talk to me. If you look at my profile, it's very sparse. I don't throw any questions out. Like it's your show. You ask me what you want to ask
yeah,
me. And I kind of do the same thing with my own programs here. It's just like I have a set list of questions I ask just so I can have something to reflect back onto. Um, as we're going along here, if things aren't really kicking along here and we're not necessarily on code just yet, and so things are kind of dry, now I have something I can just kind of keep things
go
going, and,
in.
and
Yeah,
until, but I if I have about maybe 10 questions, I'll maybe ask 3 4, maybe half of them.
yeah,
I,
half of yeah.
and the
That's
rest,
that's
and
a good thing. Yeah,
right, and the rest are like follow-up questions to things that they've said, and that's how I like to go. Like you, I like to kind of keep it like improvisational jazz, where it's just like, let's start out with something here and see where it takes us, and it might work out great, might not. Again, that's the adventure of creativity.
but the weird thing is, like, what I find is that improvisational jazz thing. It works like 90% of the time for me.
Hmm.
Most of the people, if they were nervous, they start to be less nervous because they were trying to stay on script, and that was got causing them to get anxious. But
Hmm.
if they feel like I'm actually talking to you like I'm your friend and we're
Right.
just having a conversation like there's nobody else in the room,
Right.
and I'm actually listening to what you say
Hmm.
and diving into some points and not just going off of like a like a script. And so
Right.
when people realize like, oh, he's actually listening to me, he's
Yeah.
actually getting what I'm saying, right? And
Hmm.
then we can actually have like a conversation that goes back and forth.
Right. Exactly. And if you just go by a script, I feel like you're really kind of missing out on the magic of what you could be a conversation you could be having with this person. I interviewed a woman several weeks ago. She was an immigrant. She lives in Dallas. She was an immigrant from uh, I want to say Estonia. I'm forgetting if she said
Oh, okay.
Estonia or Latvia. I feel like Latvia actually.
Latvia,
Yeah,
Latvia.
she lives in Houston, Texas right now, but she was an immigrant from Eastern Europe. And, you know, I asked her, well, what made you want to move at a young age from everything you knew back in your home country to now living in Houston, Texas for the last 25 years? And at the end of our interview, she told me, like, I've done like 50 something interviews. No one has ever asked me why I left Latvia.
Yeah, 'cause they go by the script.
Right, right. Like everyone, yeah, and some people, some of these guys they pump out like several dozen interviews in a day. I don't do that, and so they got it
Yeah,
down to a science. But yeah, I found that just incredible. Like someone who is a young person decides they're going to leave Eastern Europe and move to the United States and build a business and build a life there. Um, Pretty much from scratch, and not one person asks you, so why'd you do something like that? Why don't you just stay back at home where things are comfortable, where things are where you knew, where your family is and all that stuff? I just found it's mystifying to me that no one would ever think to ask her that.
yeah. 'Cause I think some people they don't actually think of it and this like I don't know they get into a formula like we're so
Mm,
into algorithms today. It's like, oh, the top 10 processes and you need to do these steps, and everybody wants these magic bullet steps.
right.
So they think that if I get this formula and I get this algorithm, I get this way to do it, then that's the only way to do it. Where I'm kind of, if I'm coming from an improvisational kind of experimental music mindset, my idea is I like to kind of challenge things and do it and rip it up and invert it and
Right.
go whatever way I feel like. And so that doesn't necessitate the typical in the box thinking.
No,
Um,
that's chaos for a lot of people.
yeah, they can't stand it. They can't deal with it. And then one of the questions, some of the questions one of the quick things I start to ask people is like, what are three things about yourself that people wouldn't expect? Right. And I'll do it kind of near the end of the show, and we're kind of near the end of this show. But if
Mhm.
like there are three things about your life that you don't think people would immediately find apparent, what would those be?
Three things about my life that people don't find apparent. Well, I'm very shy. I don't like going out and meeting people. Kind of like I think I alluded to this earlier. I'm a very introverted person. I'm an only child. So I grew up just with things just being me and me and my mom mostly. And so I got used to being inside my own head. And that's a good thing because you're comfortable in your own company. It's a bad thing because it does kind of stunt you socially. It's you know it's both an advantage and a handicap. So that's something that probably most people, well, I mean, some people might kind of get that from me if you met me in real person, but
Your person.
if you online, just given what I do, you may not suspect that.
Yeah.
But no, that is definitely me.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of times, stage personas, I run into
Hmm.
that a lot. Like when I produce with like work with a musician, and they can present this like a hyperbolic kind of like way over the top. But
Hmm.
when you deal with them, they're like super nervous, have tons of anxiety, not self-confident, but they get on stage, they're like Mick Jagger.
Yeah,
They're like, Prince. Prince was famous for that. Like, he'd be on stage when you try to talk to him, he's like painfully shy,
yeah,
painfully awkward, not as smooth as he appears. And
yeah.
even actors can be get into that zone. Like they could do this amazing performance. You try to talk to him, and you can like, oh, I can't even get anything out of him.
Mhm.
Like he's like very difficult. He can't. But on stage, he looks like he can be anybody. He can
Yeah,
present everything. It's just people have these different like masks that they
right.
put on, and it's not always what it appears to be.
Absolutely not.
And then I guess for your audience, you talk about your company. We didn't really go into it like dark media.
All right.
How did you decide to create that company? What was the reason behind it?
Uh, well, the podcasting started out with Fitness Reborn with Sean, which was really, I kind of intended that podcast to be like an adjunct to my fitness business. So I was a fitness trainer, and so I have this podcast, and the idea was that I could use this as a platform, maybe for my own clientele, but also for myself and whoever else wants to listen to it. That there's so much information, so much knowledge out there, so many different people from different points of view, different thoughts, and there's so much out there. And I guess I started this during COVID, and me and just about any other person that had a microphone and a laptop and internet access. Hey, I can do a podcast. That's the thing to do. And so I did it. And really, so from there, I decided I was going to focus less on the fitness business and more on the fitness podcast eventually, because I saw this just kind of continuing to grow, and it's still growing. And in my infinite wisdom as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, I figured, well, maybe I should put this under a heading of some type. So I chose Dark Age Media. I'm not entirely clear on where that
Came from.
where that really came from. I think it was kind of like, I think it was inspired by my fitness company, because my fitness company was called Renaissance Fitness.
Mm.
And Renaissance, my emblem, my insignia was Da Vinci's Universal Man,
Oh,
Renaissance,
uh-huh.
Universal Man, Da Vinci,
Yeah,
that kind
yeah.
of stuff. And it was just kind of like an offshoot of that, because Leonardo da Vinci is like the very antithesis of everything having to do with the Dark Ages, right?
Yeah,
He
he's a
he
Renaissance
right,
man.
right. He's a Renaissance man. He stands for scientific, artistic, enlightenment,
Yeah.
and like the very pinnacle of everything that we associate with the Italian Renaissance is Leonardo da Vinci. And so Dark
Very
Age,
expansive
Dar-
person. Yeah, it's very like don't have a lot of boundaries, can mix
right,
the arts with science,
right,
with art.
exactly.
Yeah,
Mhm,
that's yeah,
right,
different type of Renaissance people are thought of as like, wow, they're
right,
multitaskers.
right.
They
And
yeah,
so
they
like,
can't
yeah,
pin them down.
right. And so Dark Age was kind of like I
The
guess
opposite.
the opposite, almost like a regression from that, I guess in some ways. That's kind of a negative spin, but I guess it is that. So we had the Renaissance and now we're in Dark Age. And I don't know, it just sounded cool. Dark Age media.
Yeah.
And then I got this cool text, this cool font, and I was playing it around on my Canva account. I was just kind of mixing. That's the other thing too, is like the graphic design of all this stuff here. That really just I love it. I love it. All this editing stuff that you can work with. I just love it. And I was just tooling around with it more and more and more. And it started to come together. And I was just like, I'm not sure this makes a whole lot of sense, but
It makes sense. A lot of times people come at things like, the punk aesthetic, the idea, like you had all these progressive bands like Yes and Genesis, Led Zeppelin, all that. And then people say it come to Clash and the Sex Pistols and the Ramones come along. And suddenly you don't have to have the best voice. You don't have to be a Roger Plant. You don't have to be like, all these great, perfect pitch singers and perfect players, that you can have passion, right? So the idea is that you can kind of regress a little bit and say, I don't have to be a virtuoso.
Right.
I can have heart. I can be, and then you get bands like the Talking Heads. It's like, well, these guys are kind of weird. What's that? Because you're willing to entertain that. I'm not gonna be, I'm not, like the perfect pitch. I'm not Marvin Gaye. Like I'm not gonna have that level of voice, but I'm gonna do something like David Byrne. He's like, I'm gonna come out there and just be this strange cat and try things, and like, wow, I can connect, right? So this punk aesthetic and music is like, even if you're not like, you can find a punk aesthetic in multiple forms. Like fact that you're willing to kind of challenge and be kind of go against the grain a little bit, be a little,
I guess I kind of thought like, because, eventually a couple months ago, I started my second podcast, Dear DSM, which is all about the city and culture and people of Des Moines, Iowa. And I live in Iowa, for those of you who don't know. And Des Moines is the capital city. And Des Moines is such a neat place. It really is. It doesn't get hardly any fanfare in terms of its cultural output and its potential. Like nothing compared to what like Kansas City or Chicago or all these other cities in the Midwest. But Des Moines has so much talent. It's just crazy. And the more I dig into it, the more I'm finding. Like we have a
wow, so you're underserved.
Well, yeah, it's really it's underserved, and I'm finding out more and more that we've got a large rap industry, or a burgeoning rap industry in Des Moines. We've got,
that's what we need. We need a new scene, because sometimes the old scenes are too much.
Right.
We need new scenes, like get people to check it out.
Right. And as I speak to more and more people, it's just all these different artists are coming out. A lot of them, like I said, are part of the rap scene, but there's a lot of like jazz fusion, rock and roll, punk groups there too. And, we all have kind of like a mutual interest where they want the exposure. I want the exposure. So we're kind of serving, we're kind of serving each other's needs. Going back to what you said earlier, is like, we're swimming in the same water here, we both want the exposure. I want the exposure for my podcast. You want the exposure for your songs. So, let's just kind of like help each other out here, and let's just make this happen here. And, everyone,
you create like, if you create a collective scene, like, if you like, part of what I was originally doing with my podcast is creating like an emerging independent artist space. We even did like festivals where we did 3-day festivals of all the bands we interviewed, went and played 3-day festivals for 2 years. We did these Peg Bedroom Producer Festivals where we had the bands come on and do live sets from like their bedroom or their basement or wherever they were. We had our Australian band do it from a soundstage. Nice. We had other bands do it from their bedroom. We had other people do like music videos and present them, and they had a half hour to present their material. Rather than do an interview, we had already done the interview, let them do a little mini concert on a festival. And so like when you start to create your own stage, then you can bring people onto those stages, and then give them, a chance to be heard and seen, which I think that's what we're trying to do as podcasters, I believe.
Right. And I think, honestly, that's the way it's always kind of worked. Like, back in the olden days when artists and radio DJs were working in tandem with each other, a lot of bands and a lot of artists got recognition because somebody who had a radio station and a pretty sizable audience and maybe had an ear for something that was new and could appreciate it said, "Hey, I like this. How about we get you on the show? How about we play a song or two? If you've got something, you got a tape for me or something like that. I think you've got real potential here. I think that my listeners would appreciate this. Or if they've never heard anything like this, but I think I like it and they listen to me. So I assume that they listen to the things that I say. And so if I put my muscle behind you, who knows? You might actually just take off here. So
Well, I think it's the hope for music because we have so
yeah,
many like corporate structures trying to kind of dumb down the variety of music.
exactly. All right.
And what I always liked is the local DJ scenes, where in the old radio world is you have a Detroit scene, the Boston scene, New York scene, Los Angeles scene. All these scenes and different DJs would push those bands from those scenes,
Hmm.
right? And then people would get to hear the Chicago sound or the Mississippi Delta sound or the New York sound. And you would get to be able to get it. It wouldn't just be like, oh, there's the national decided sound from the record label.
Right.
Like, you would get these people coming up from the basement, from the
Right.
underground.
Right.
And so I've always been a big purveyor of like the college radio,
Hmm.
indie radio, mixtape type audience, underground, bootlegger kind of idea. Is like get those
Right.
people to as many ears as possible.
Right. And it only takes one artist or one group to really put a city on a map, because who even care about Liverpool before the Beatles?
Yeah, they did. Nobody cared.
Who gave a damn about Liverpool before the Beatles? Who cared about Seattle before Nirvana?
Yep.
It's just like, all these little, kind of backwater, well, not really backwater, but just kind of like non-entity cities and communities that no one really thinks about. But then someone comes onto the scene that attracts enough attention, and it's like, wow. And now we have things called the Seattle sound or the Chicago sound, like, or the Minneapolis sound, that kind of stuff. Like,
Minneapolis sound for Prince. Yeah,
yeah, for
yeah.
Prince, right? Who comes, like, again, like Minneapolis. Who thinks of Minneapolis? Who would think of Minneapolis
Minneapolis has a
without
sound.
Prince?
But
Without Prince.
you had Prince, you had Paul Westerberg, you had Husker Du, you actually had a Minneapolis scene that was kind of varied. It had
Hmm.
punk bands and it had funk bands, like the time of
Right.
Prince, and then you have guys like the Replacements, Husker Du coming out of that city. It's like, wow, that's actually a scene I really got into.
Hmm.
Being in the '80s, I was into punk along with funk and jazz, but it just like I think just allowing people to be very expansive.
Hmm.
And you just like, okay, maybe you don't dig who I'm talking to today, but maybe you'll dig who I talk to tomorrow. And
Right.
so just tune in because it's going to be different all the time. And maybe you like that. And so
Right.
try that and see if people dig the variety. I think
Right.
that's the best we can do for our audience is like if we're entertained, well, then maybe you ought to check it out because there's a reason like why we think this is cool. So
Right.
yeah, check us out.
Right. And going back to what you said about how kind of corporate companies kind of like engineer a lot of the stuff that people listen to, or I think that's kind of a growing problem too, because we have, and this is kind of goes to the whole importance of independent media and independent um, outlets, to where they can find these things and they don't have to go through all types of checks and balances and executives and red
Gates, yeah, the gates.
gate,
Like,
all,
there's
all
all
right,
these
right,
gatekeepers.
all these gatekeepers who are just looking for, okay, like, is this actually going to chart? Is this going to be a worthwhile return on investment, that sort of thing here. And it's something I think it hasn't it's not a 21st century thing by any means. It's always kind of been that way, but
Always been there, yeah.
ever since the American Idol thing took off 20 years ago, it is really just kind of it's exploded in terms of just how pervasive it is, that you know everything has to have some sort of wide
Formula.
commercial formula, wide commercial appeal for them to get any appreciation from any sort of major label here.
Yeah,
And that not only applies to music, it applies to information, it applies to
everything.
news, everything. And so, you have the same maybe 4 or 5 companies controlling everything. And so the importance of independent media now, I think
Super
is more important than it ever has been. Like, uh, the digital landscape that we live in, um, it's really weird, 'cause, again, with social media, because you can get all kinds of information at any point in the day. Most of it's useless.
yeah,
Most of it is just like,
clickbait,
clickbait,
clickbait.
filler information. But you know, we're living in a time when you can know everything, at the same time know nothing.
Yeah,
You
because so
know,
much clickbait, so much useless
right?
information.
Absolutely useless information, and whatever potentially good information or worthwhile information you are getting has been put through so many filters that you don't even know, like,
What the real deal was, yeah.
right, and you don't even know what you're hearing now or what you're reading now is actually true, because you don't know how many different levels it went through, it
It
filtered
was just
down.
edited to just be tittillating or give you a piece of the
Mhm.
truth, and so if you only get a piece of something, it's like a lot of times the clickbait, it will usually be diametrically opposed to, like, what it actually says, right?
Right,
You actually read it, and it's this headline that doesn't match the topic. It
right,
was
and
just
so
designed to get you to jump into it, and it's like, well, that's not even
right,
what they
right.
said it was.
So
They just
if you heard like some sort of soundbite, or you read an article, and maybe if you backtracked it a couple different steps from the origin of the actual bit of information, then you might find out it's completely different than what you were fed. And
yeah,
just
it's
this,
out of
and
context. They
right,
take the line out of context.
right, and just this maybe 5 second or maybe 30-second long blurb that you just listened to. And so, if you want to call that a dark age, there you go, because
Oh, yeah. And
everything is just kind of regressing.
yeah, there's a regression. I remember Frank Zappa. I'm a big fan of Van
Oh
Zappa, and
yeah.
he used to say, back in the day, we didn't like our kind of cigar smoking executives in the music industry, but like I wish we had them now, because he said the guys today, the old guys would say, well, I don't really understand this music, but maybe somebody will like it, so I'll put it out.
Hmm.
Right? Where Zappa says to now, you got guys who say, well, I do understand it, and I want to just take like an algorithm and repeat it, and only repeat this. And I don't,
Right.
I'm going to limit. So they're very fun. They're funneling what they think is, they think they have too much expertise. And like Frank said, these guys are kind of dangerous to the arts because they think they know more than they do. Where they have a
Hmm.
very discerning taste that is super limiting. And
Hmm.
he said some of the most experimental bands that ever were allowed to happen in the 60s to like the 80s. And then
Right.
the big companies took over and said, "Oh, no, no, we know better." And then you don't get that. You don't get the Lou Reed, Velvet Undergrounds. You don't get like the Talking Heads. Like, would you get a band like the Talking Heads today to come out? Probably not. You wouldn't get like a Lou Reed, Velvet Underground. You wouldn't get Funkadelic probably couldn't even get out the door. Like
Yeah.
there's so many gates like are actually stopping really good music because it's like, oh, let's get another clone of Taylor Swift or Beyonce or some whoever the top 10 rapper is,
Hmm.
and not actually looking at the fact that music. Hendrix was somebody that you never heard before. You know, the Beatles, the way they did stuff is like that was not really being done that way. But now you don't even let innovation come through.
No.
You just want to repeat whatever worked.
Right. It's a very much, it's a closed environment. Um, Entertainment, media, information. It's really sad. And so my hope is with my company, especially with my publication, SAMO Lives, by bringing people in that I think have something substantive that they can offer the world. And it doesn't have to be anything necessarily that is close to what I do, but
Mhm.
somebody that has things that they can contribute, that together we can kind of grow with this publication, and we can get your voices out there, because there's a lot of talented people out there who don't get the spotlight, who don't get a lot of fanfare, who have to deal with the gatekeepers, whoever they might be. And I think this is just the brilliance of everything that we are doing here in these mediums, because there's a lot of restrictions on speech. Otherwise, there's a lot of people being canceled,
Yeah.
for ridiculous reasons here, because it's just enough people said, I don't like what he said. Well, then I'll quote you, George Carlin, just turn it off then.
Turn it off. Yeah, that's why I always said, if you don't like the music, turn it off. Don't try to ban the Beatles.
Right. Right,
They tried
exactly.
to ban the Beatles because they didn't like what John Lennon said. If
Hmm.
you don't like it, don't listen to it. Don't burn it and ban it. But that's the mindset. But we have gone over, but we were having such a good time. I didn't want to cut it down.
Me
But
either.
again, SAMO Lives, Substack.com is fully clickable. If people click there, tell people what they find there.
Well, what they find is mostly, this is where I upload all my podcasts. So this is the uploading platform for my podcast. So you'll find my podcasts, my podcast, Dear DSM and Fitness Reborn with Sean. I'm also working with a woman right now. I'm just helping her start her own podcast. She's in the health and wellness and fitness space, same as me. I'm working on getting her podcast up and running. She hasn't actually interviewed anybody, but we're working on that. I've got a section designated for her, so when she gets podcast going, that'll be uploaded. You'll find articles by another contributor who I just kind of took on, a woman I interviewed not that long ago, actually. And you'll find some blogs from me too, and the blogs are varied. You should go in there and check it out. I got a blog on John Coltrane, actually.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'll be into
Yeah,
that. I'm into
yeah,
that.
you should. Yeah, you should go check it out here. It's not about John Coltrane himself. It's
Well,
it's about a particular work that he did,
oh,
and
a
and
piece.
so yeah,
Yeah,
and so a lot of it is like a playground for me. It's like, oh, I got a moment of inspiration. I'm going to write about something that I think is really cool, and so you can kind of go through some of the blogs there and see that I got all kinds of different things going on there.
that's
But
cool.
it's
Yeah,
but
I like being expansive. So if you're
yeah,
doing stuff that's cool, I'll check
yeah.
it out.
So I got opinion articles on a few different things in there. So it's a small publication. It's just taking off. It's only a few months old. My plan is to expand it with word of mouth and with content and with actual substance. So my goal here is to actually bring things to people that I think will help advance their life forward, and things that hopefully, or things that they maybe would not have known about otherwise. And so my whole goal here, really, at the end of the day, is to be a facilitator. That's all I want.
I think that's what podcasters we do best is,
Mhm.
and I thank you for being on the show. And it's
Thank
great
you.
to talk to a fellow podcaster, because I do believe this forum is a really great forum for having freedom of
Right.
expression and not being canceled, and being able to say, we're only canceled if we decide we don't want to do it.
Right.
So,
Right.
we're as long as we decide we're going to do it, we're going to be here. So that's cool. So thank you again for being a guest on the Family Electric Goes podcast. And everybody, we were just on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, and we'll be on all the other podcast platforms where you can listen to podcasts or watch them by tomorrow. And thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Phantom. I appreciate it.